Okay, let's start the webinar. Right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining this webinar jointly organized by the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport North America, Canada, and CILT Singapore. Whether you're joining us from Canada, the US, Asia, South America, or even Africa, there's one thing we all have in common. Trade today is harder to execute than it used to be. Canada and the US have traditionally been strong trading partners, but the operating environment has changed given the current geopolitical climate. Many North American businesses are actively expanding sourcing and market access into Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America, regions where regulatory complexity, data requirements, and approval processes are fundamentally different from what they are used to before. For the industry, this creates a very real challenge. A shipment is no longer about moving goods from point A to point B. It's about synchronizing commercial documents, regulatory approvals, security filings, and agency requirements. Often, this is done across multiple jurisdictions. And remember, you have to do all that without slowing down the supply chain or even increasing cost. And this is where today's topic becomes highly practical. First, we will hear about how countries are diversifying their trade and what that means for businesses and supply chains. Trade pacts, free trade agreements, backdoor secret negotiations all mean the way we do business will change dramatically and drastically. This is when the trade single window becomes a great platform for trade enhancement. A trade single window is often discussed as a governmental or customs initiative. But from an industry perspective, it is increasingly becoming core infrastructure, the digital backbone that determines how quickly goods clear, how predictable lead times are, and how scalable cross-border operations can be. The principle is simple. Submit data once, use it many times. But the impact is significant. Fewer redundant submissions, clearer visibility across agencies, and a more consistent interface between traders, logistic providers, and the government. For participants joining us from Asia and South America, many of these concepts may already be familiar. Some regions are further along in single window maturity, interoperability, and even cross-border data exchange. Your experience offers valuable lessons in what works, what doesn't, and how industry can engage more effectively with regulators. For North American stakeholders, the question is increasingly not whether this matters, but how fast trade infrastructure can evolve to support diversification, resilience, and growth beyond traditional corridors. With that, let me hand over to our speakers. First, Mr. Hugh Stephens, and then Mr. Mike Yap of Crimson Logic. Mr. Stephens is currently Vice Chair of the Canadian Committee on Pacific Economic Cooperation, Distinguished Fellow at the Asia-Pacific Foundation of Canada, and Executive Fellow at the School of Public Policy at University of Calgary. During his almost 30-year career in the Canadian Foreign Service, he served at Canadian Mission in Beirut, Hong Kong, Beijing, Islamabad, Seoul, and Taipei as head of mission, and as Assistant Deputy Minister for Policy and Communications at the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade in Ottawa. In 2001, he became Senior Vice President Public Policy for Asia Pacific for Time Warner based in Hong Kong. He moved to Victoria, British Columbia in 2010, where he currently resides. He has written extensively on Canada's engagement with the Asia Pacific region in the Globe and Mail, National Post, Ottawa Citizen, iPolitics, The Diplomat, Open Canada, and others. Mr. Stephens also writes extensively on international copyright issues, has written in defense of copyright, and maintains a weekly blog on the topic at hughstephenblog.net. Mr. Stephens, please.
Thank you very much, Eddie. I hope everybody can hear me. And Rebecca, thank you for, putting up the first slide. So it's a great pleasure to be here. In this case, representing the Canadian National Committee on Pacific Economic Cooperation, which I will explain a little bit more about later. This meeting is being recorded. So in my title, you see that trade diversification looms large, and that is indeed one of our focuses today. It's become very much for our Canadian audience a watchword. To paraphrase Prime Minister Carney, interdependence and integration have become vulnerabilities at this particular time. And so Canada has embarked on a widespread search for alternate trade partners to supplement those that it has. Could we have the next slide, please, Rebecca? Thank you. To anybody in the audience from Canada, this will be a familiar story, but perhaps for some others, you will be a little bit surprised to see the heavy dependence of Canadian trade with our southern neighbor, the United States. Of course, it's a vibrant and an extremely large and mature market. But nonetheless, I think most people would agree that to have more than a 75% dependency upon one market it leads to a great deal of vulnerability. This, in fact, is a reflection, of course, of geographic proximity, historical trading patterns, but also it's not an accident. Over the last 35 years, this relationship has been nurtured, first through the bilateral Canada-US trade agreement, then through NAFTA, then through the new USMCA or CUSMA, which is up for review this year. Whether it will be reviewed or not, of course, is very much an open question. So what has happened over the years is both by natural proclivity and by design, the two economies have become very, very closely integrated. However, it's pretty clear that overdependence on one market carries risk, particularly, as I said, at the time of interdependence becoming a sign of vulnerability. And for that reason, Canada, over the years, and particularly in recent years, has embarked on a number of initiatives to diversify our trade relationships. And I've listed some of those measures on the right-hand side of the screen. Our second trading partner, China, we do not have an agreement with. In fact, there is the 4% shown there with China is actually masks a 3-to-1 trade deficit with China. But Canada has actively embarked on other relationships. The Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement was one of the first. We have an agreement in place with Europe, that is the CETA, the Canada-Europe Trade Partnership Agreement. The mouthful agreement, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, I'll just refer to it as the TPP, was initiated about 10 years ago, and Canada was one of the founding members. Recently, we have negotiated an agreement with Indonesia, would like to do more with ASEAN. That's currently under negotiation. And in fact, Prime Minister Carney has just come back from India, where the long dormant Canada-India trade agreement apparently is going to be given a new lease on life. In the background to that, Canada has launched an Indo-Pacific strategy. It launched it 3 or 4 years ago to try and shift more emphasis to the Indo-Pacific region, and has, as a middle power, has always been a great supporter of the international rules-based system, has worked hard to preserve what is left, frankly, of the WTO, and is an active participant in the Trade Facilitation Agreement, which is very relevant to the discussion we're going to have. Now, most of these or all of these agreements have some provisions addressing digital trade, some more up to date than others, but they fit very much into the discussion that we're having today on trade facilitation and how digital trade can assist diversification. Next slide, please, Rebecca. Let me turn quickly to the Asia Pacific and elaborate a little bit more on the organization that I'm representing today. In the picture, you'll see the 32nd PEC General Meeting. The PEC is the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, and it's one of a number of organizations that Canada and others work with in the Asia Pacific region. I think pretty much everybody is familiar with APEC. Which was founded in 1989. Canada was a charter member and has been a member ever since, although it's only ever hosted the APEC summit once. Side by side with APEC is an organization called PEC, Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, which actually predates APEC by about 10 years. It regards itself really, I think, as the godfather of APEC. And it is a classic track to non-governmental organization representing sort of three pillars: academia, government officials acting in their personal capacity, and the private sector. And its role is to bring forward policy recommendations, to look at policy issues across a range of issues. And of course, these have changed over the years very much. Today, as you can see, the discussion last year, this was at the annual meeting in Seoul, was on trade, AI, and demographics in a shifting global landscape. There are actually more members of PEC than there are of APEC. There are 23 members, and each country, each member, each economy, I guess, to use APEC speak, has a national committee. I am the vice chair of the Canadian committee, which is known as CANCPEC, CANCPEC, but the Canadian representative body within PEC. Now, as I mentioned, one of the roles of PEC is to act as a policy analyst, to bring forward new ideas, to push government from this tripartite sector to look at new issues. And one area we've looked at very recently, in the last couple of years, has been on digital trade. Next slide, please, Rebecca. What really brought this forward was the fact that in 2024, Canada was the chair of the CPTPP Commission, the trade agreement. This trade agreement today encompasses 12 member states, with the recent admission of the United Kingdom, which may surprise you. So it's obviously spread beyond just the Indo-Pacific region. It includes Japan. It includes Singapore and Malaysia. In Latin America, it includes Mexico, Chile, and Peru. It includes Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Brunei. Anyway, there are 12 members. Notably, not a member is the United States nor China, although China has applied to join, as has Taiwan, or Chinese Taipei. And those applications are still pending. In any event, this agreement was signed eventually in around 2017, 2018. The agreement came into effect. It was drafted back a couple of years earlier, and as I said, has been expanded now to include the United Kingdom. Now, in 2024, Canada was the chair. So the chair rotates amongst the members, and it's the job of the chair to sort of move things forward. The organization has an ongoing agenda. One is to look at expansion. As I mentioned, both China and Taiwan are in the wings, waiting to be considered. But also, it's important to update the agreement. A lot has happened since it came into effect in 2018. And as I mentioned, it was drafted a couple of years earlier than that. And so there's really a need. And so we felt that this would be something that the Canadian committee could put forward. And we worked with the Australian committee, given that Australia was the chair the following year. Now, it's interesting to note that not all members of PEC are members of the CPTPP. In fact, I think about I guess nine or 10 of the members. The UK clearly is not a member of APEC. But the other members of PEC are interested in looking at free trade or liberalized trade across the Pacific. Some of them, in fact, are applicant members. And so we drew on a group of experts from across the region, but focused on those members of PEC that were representing countries that were actual members. Now, let me, just before I quickly come to the methodology, I mentioned that the agreement needs updating. It has an e-commerce chapter, but it's not a digital trade chapter. It was drafted back in probably 2015, 2016. And in fact, the word single window, which we're going to talk about today, is not even mentioned. The closest reference is Article 14.9 within the chapter, within the e-commerce chapter on paperless trading, and it's fairly weak. It's the parties will endeavor, to promote documents in electronic form and so forth. So we felt that this was really timely to try and push the CPTPP Commission and the member states to focus on this particular area. Next slide, please. So what we did is we pulled together a group of experts. I mentioned some of the experts were from PEC committees in countries that were members of the agreement, and others were interested members. It was led by Canada with strong participation from Australia and others. And effectively, we looked at a range of agreements, things like the DEPA, the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, the agreements that Singapore has signed with a number of countries, including Australia, New Zealand, the China, Japan, Korea agreement, looking at the best practices across these agreements to see what was missing. We also zeroed in on the WTO's joint statement initiative on e-commerce and on the trade facilitation agreement, which is another track in terms of promoting single window. Now, for those not that familiar with it, the WTO, because the WTO is facing a number of challenges in moving forward, it has embarked on these JSIs, these joint statement initiatives, where willing members of the WTO decide to move forward. And one of these was in the area of electronic commerce. And as of December last year, the participants, now 71 members of the WTO, probably about half the WTO members, have endorsed a draft text. Again, interestingly, the US is not part of this, but it's been drafted as a potential annex to the WTO agreement. And one of the articles in this draft text calls for the implementation of a single window. And I'll just read very quickly the text relating to that. Each party shall endeavor to enable through a single entry point the electronic submission of the documentation or data that party requires for importation, exportation, or transit of goods through its territory for all its participating authorities or agencies. So this is moving ahead on the WTO front, and so we wanted to adopt that baseline for our CPTPP study. Next slide, please. Now, it's a long study. At the bottom is the link, and I'll be happy to provide the link to anybody after if you want to read the full document, which I hope you do. It's about 40 pages long. The process came up with 13 recommendations that were grouped into 5 areas: artificial intelligence, cross-border data flows and governance, cybersecurity, digital trust, inclusion and SME participation, and finally, regulatory cooperation. And it's in this area of regulatory cooperation, I think, that is of most relevant to our discussion today. This picks up on issues such as electronic invoicing, e-payments, paperless trading, and in particular, single window systems to facilitate cross-border transactions. Next slide, please. So the report was finalized. And we discussed it with the business community. There's another group associated with APEC, the APEC Business Advisory Council, who endorsed its recommendations. And the full study was presented by the Australian committee to the Australian chair. By the time we had finished, Australia had taken the lead and was the chair. And this was presented to the Australian minister and Australian officials late summer, early fall last year. So now, of course, the big question is, well, what happens next? And I think part of the answer to that rests with perhaps some of the people on this seminar. As I mentioned, the purpose of the commission, and Vietnam will be taking over the commission as the chair this year, is to continue to review and update the text of the agreement. Digital trade is a clear priority for this group of countries, as well as for many others. So we're hopeful that in terms of moving ahead to renew the agreement, to update the e-commerce chapter, that this study will be useful input. But of course, there's absolutely no guarantee. It's up to governments to do it. And governments respond to their constituencies. So for any of those of you who are particularly interested in seeing this agreement updated in terms of digital trade and who are from member states of the agreement, I would encourage you to push your governments and to push your officials and to make it known that it's time to move ahead. And in fact, there's a very good blueprint that's being produced to do it. Awareness is important, and really, I think indeed this webinar and the discussions that we're having are part of this work and the work that CILTNA is doing. So I thank you for your attention and look forward to the second part of the presentation. We'd be happy to try and answer any questions after we come to the Q&A period. So thank you, Eddie, and everyone else.
And thank you, Hugh. And I think, it's critical, right? Looking at the second slide where, the United States, occupies 75%, in fact, 76% of trade between the two countries. With the CPTPP, I think, the free trade agreement will certainly help Canada in a long way and all the economies around that. So one of the purpose is basically to promote economic integration, market access, a breaking down of barriers, including tariffs. So I think that will go in a long way to creating a more integration in our economies, right? So yeah, and just for everybody else that's on the webinar, thanks for dialing in. If you do have questions for either Hugh or Mike, please post them in the chat room. We will try to answer as many as we can, given the time that we have. But let me move on to today's main topic, which is basically that of trade single window. So our other speaker today is Mr. Mike Yap, the head of Group Business Development at Crimson Logic. Mike drives strategic initiatives to expand the group's reach, building new markets and cultivating key commercial relationships. He has deep expertise in the area of trade compliance and brings with him into both product and sales strategies across the commercial and government sectors. Since joining Crimson Logic in 2006, Mike has played a pivotal role in growing the company's footprint worldwide, securing projects in over 20 countries and delivering strong recurring revenue growth. He previously led trade compliance, where his team achieved a 60% increase in transaction volumes and launched the US e-commerce import program. Mike holds a Bachelor of Arts in Marketing and Media from Murdoch University, Australia, and has built a career at the intersection of business development, compliance, and innovation. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Mike Yap.
All right, thank you very much, Eddie. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. Today, I'll be sharing an introduction to trade single window, what it is, why it matters, and how global best practices, including Singapore experience, can guide a successful implementation. So let's begin. Shall we go to the next slide, Rebecca? Thank you. A single window is a platform that allows traders to submit regulatory documents through one point of entry instead of dealing with multiple agencies separate. The entire process is streamlined through a unified system. Next slide, please. This concept is founded on simplifying trade, by coordinating government agency, harmonizing data standards, and allowing businesses to submit information once for reuse across agency. I think the whole idea of single window is really to facilitate trade, to reduce as much friction as possible when dealing with the regulators themselves. The golden rule is if the information is electronic, individual data elements should only be submitted once. Next slide. Thank you, Rebecca. Trade single window didn't emerge overnight. It evolved from custom automation to limited B2G connection to nationwide single window with many government agencies integrated. Today, many countries are transitioning into regional or global data exchange platform. And next slide. A well-implemented single window brings significant benefit from operational efficiency, cost savings, transparency, faster clearance, better compliance, and national competitiveness, which is one of the top agenda for many countries. It also builds capability and supports a more technologically adept trading community. Next slide, please. To make sure single window work, I think we had to adopt the different kind of standards and try to harmonize them. And this list of all the different standards being used. I think the primary standards that most single window follows is the WCO data model. And of course, we look at some of the UN EDIFACT standard as well, and trying to harmonize them together with the air cargo, the ocean side of things, and even for land border crossing. And we also factor in some of the WCO safe framework that was established during the Kyoto Convention to ensure interoperability as well. I mean, if you look at trade, it's beyond just a buyer and seller buying from each other and trading. Subsequently, after the buy-sell process, they had to actually move the physical goods, and you can move through different modes, for example, ocean, air, and even through land or rail as well. And sometimes some of these goods have to undergo multimodal transportation before you actually reach the market or the buyer itself. So these standards allow systems cross-border to communicate reliably. I think to help you to explain a bit of some of this concept, I have taken Singapore Trade Single Window as a reference. When we first started TradeNet, it was started way back in late 1980s. So next slide, please. So before we start TradeNet in Singapore, I think it's good to understand the Singapore as a country where we started in 1965. Where we were independence. We were constrained by limited resources, limited market. We have a very small domestic market. Our population size back then was less than 3 million. So the government, in order to make it work, they actually had to overcome many of these challenges. And eventually, they identified, not only investing in industry, but eventually adopting digital technology. Can we go to the next slide, please? So before we have TradeNet, next one, sorry. Yep. Before we had TradeNet, these are some of the problem or operational issues that we face. We have too much paperwork. Back then, in 1987, we have around 10,000 declarations a day that the custom and other government agency had to deal with. Depending on the type of goods, we have 4 to 20 documents to be completed for each import or export. And everything was handled manually. And there was a very high cost of transaction because not only is being manual, everything had to be submitted physically at different offices, depending on the type of goods. And the cost estimate of trade documentation alone is about 4 to 7% of the value of the goods shipped. Next. So with all these challenges, I think the government realized that if we want to become a hub, a regional hub or a global hub, I think we had to transform how we do things. And they have done many different studies, and eventually they came out with the concept of TradeNet. And to be back then, when we came up with the design of TradeNet, there wasn't a nationwide single window model that we can actually follow. So very much of the TradeNet that was being designed then was consolidating all the different consultation with the industry, field study that they have done in both US, Europe, and at the same time, they engage the technological, the IT people to come up with the design of it. Fast forward, I think today we are talking about, from a 2 to 7 days processing time in Singapore. The moment you submit your permit itself, within less than a minute, you will actually get your approval. And that applies to almost 95 up to 98% of most of the transaction. There definitely will be some transaction that require additional control or scrutiny. and that will actually go into subsequently processing by the agency themselves. From a fee charge point of view, it used to be $10 to $20, and this is just talking about regulatory fee. This has not included all the courier charges and all these things. This is pure regulatory charges from the different agency for processing such permit. And now we are able to reduce it to and consolidate into just $3 Singapore dollars. And why that's a plus is depending on the size of the shipment or the size of the documentation. Sometimes if you have one container with only one type of goods, it's simplified. But if you have thousands of lines like today for e-commerce, where people use ocean freight for e-commerce, you can have thousands of HS lines, then that's why there's a plus behind. From a documentation point of view, I think this is one of the key transformation that was being done. Back then in the past, every agency will have minimally will start off with 3 documentation with custom, with different Ministry of Trade, and it can potentially go up to 35 if all the agencies are involved in your shipment itself. What we have done was to harmonize it into a single form. I mean, today, I think in Canada or in US, you are very familiar with what is a manifest, what is a custom declaration, all these different terminology. But in the case of Singapore, we wanted to simplify for the traders. So what we have done is to just harmonize everything into one single document where all 35 agencies can make use of. So in Singapore, you will not see a custom declaration form, but what you see is an import or export permit. And basically, this single administrative document is one of the key drivers in terms of efficiency and in terms of standardization of all the data elements. And because of this ability to digitalize as well as to standardize the process, we are able to handle a larger volume, and we definitely have grown over the years from handling 10,000 daily to more than 30,000 now. Next slide, please. So we were very honored, that we have received many accolades, from all the different established institutions. Just for Harvard Business School, they have actually did 3 studies just on the Singapore TradeNet system alone. They did not do it all at once. They actually did it over a period of time, tracking the benefits, the development of this TradeNet system, which was I think innovative at that point in time when we rolled out in 1989, and even IBM have estimated that it have saved Singapore close to $1 billion every year just because we have digitalized the whole process. And this $1 billion was estimated somewhere around in the mid-90s. And if you fast forward today, I think that savings will have been very significant as well with the inflation taken into consideration. Next slide. So what are the lessons learned? I think establishing a single window is more than an IT project. I just want to share something. I mean, definitely there was a deep integration of government agency into policy coordination. How do we manage to process all these different government agency requirements on a single platform? So one of the big things that we have done was really to do a change management, to do a redesigning of the processes. Why we are able to process it within less than a minute? Because despite that, we have 7,000 business rules. We have 7,000 business rules involved in the system itself. The main reason is because when we started the single window, we actually questioned every single agency about the business rule for them to process or to be involved in the approval of the permit. If the agency are not able to articulate clearly what are the conditions for them to actually determine their approval, sometimes we might not even need that approval at all. So I'll give you an example. Imagine if you are importing a telecommunication equipment. The very standard basic business rule that is applied is to determine whether that particular telecommunication equipment falls under blacklist within the blacklist? If yes, then that business rule processing is required. And today in Singapore, what we have done is to codify all the 7,000 business rules within the single platform. From an administration point of view, we actually leave it to each agency to manage a business rule on their own, so that there is still a certain level of rules accountability, and eventually we all incorporated within the TradeNet system, and because of that ability to process, we're able to achieve that less than 1 minute processing itself, and simply to harmonize all the different documents. In the past, each agency want to have their own letterhead, but into a single administrative document where none of the agency name is being mentioned on the letterhead itself, but they are mostly, if there's any application of rule according to a specific procedure that they have, it will be mentioned as a content within the permit itself. So these are some of the alignment and of the policy and practices that we put in place as well. Next slide, please. So distilling from that, I think these are the critical steps which I earlier highlighted, the example of simplifying the process to the extent of updating even the legal framework if we have to. I think when we introduced the TradeNet system, we did not change the statute itself. We actually added in section of the law to recognize to provide to recognize the digital information that is being captured. One of the very interesting things that happened in Singapore as well is that with the introduction of TradeNet, the government make it clear to the industry that we are going to be very digital focused, but we are not throwing away all the paper itself. So what we have done in practice is to say that everything had to be submitted digitally through the TradeNet system, but we will still maintain all the hard copy documents that now they have asked the trader that you have to keep this documentation for a period of time, and in the event that there's any investigation, then this documentation had to be presented. So this is already something that the trader has been doing. I think they have been keeping documentation on behalf of their customer or for the trader themselves. They've been keeping it. So we are not duplicating, making it extra copy of the document anymore. The government just processed the electronic data, and in the event that there is any dispute or there's any investigation, then we do not just rely on the physical document as well. We also pull out all the archive of data, that electronic data that has been stored in the system. I think when we first started with this whole TradeNet, we did not go to 35. We did not implement for 35 government agency straight up. What we have done was to focus on the 4 to 5 key agency. Over a period of time, we start bringing in the other agency, and we based on the volume and also their willingness to participate in the process. And it's also very important that we had to accommodate industry feedback. I'm very careful to use the word accommodate. I think from the industry point of view, because it is quite diverse, the needs of an importer will be very different from the needs of a logistic player. So what we have done is to listen to each of them and then try to find, distill out what is the most important requirement and see how we can actually incorporate into the process. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in any single window implementation, while the design of the system, that whole change management with the government agency is important, the success depends on whether we can get the private sector to adopt the single window system. So in the case of Singapore, what we have done is that we have adopted a PPP model. Because this TradeNet system involves all the import, export, even transshipment or transit through Singapore. The participation of the industry becomes so important, And in order to make it successful, it's not a typical system where government implement and expect everyone to submit. We realized back then in the late 80s, we realized that, other than just coming out of the digital system, it's very important that we go through a adoption drive where we had to get the industry to use the system from and to help them with any challenges. I remember very much depending on the mainframe, the traders themselves. I think before that, and some of the interesting, the computer is not even working. And when we actually investigate, we realized that they don't even know how to switch on the computer themselves. So that was, 30 years ago, that was what we faced. So for us, I think the government understand that adoption is key. That's why they came out with this PPP model, where they point crimson logic to drive the adoption and providing, where we do marketing to the industry, we do mass training, where even today we are still conducting training on behalf of government. We even run service bureau for manual filing. Of course, this is, and we apply a surcharge to discourage people from coming to the physical service bureau, and we provide a 24/7 help desk. The other key strategic move that we have done for adoption is that we actually government implemented a value-added network concept. Basically, we accredit value-added service provider to allowing them to be integrated with the TradeNet system, tested their security, and allowing them to actually offer customized functionality to the traders. Earlier, I mentioned about where we have a lot of feedback from the industry to the extent that, some of the members of the private sector ask for some kind of billing, consolidation, and all this kind of functionality, which is probably unique to them. And that is something that we can't implement on the TradeNet system. That's why we have actually allowed this value-added service provider to come into the picture. Next slide, please. So with a successful adoption, I think we constantly had to monitor a single window system, and these are some of the recommended KPIs for single window. These are just very high level where you need to able to quantify, what you mean by a faster process, clearance, and release. Able to study the cost of compliance. If you look at World Bank Doing Business report or the Logistic Performance Index, they have actually all the different quantifiable parameters as well. So these are some of the KPI, for any government that is interested to consider if they want to continue to monitor the performance of the single window system. Next slide. So I think single window, that is a very brief introduction of single window and how we have done it in Singapore. Next, I would like to share a bit about, beyond trade single window. You have probably heard about terminology like single window interoperability. And we want to share some of our own perspective, how beyond single window, how can we be more connected digital trade ecosystem. Next slide. So beyond trade single window, there's also other kind of single window today existed within a country itself. If you look at trade single window, it's very much focused on the trade compliance side of things, but within the port operation, a port net as well, and that's where the port. Sometimes in the industry, people call it a port single window, where their focus is very much on the operational side of things because of access to the port vicinity itself. That you need to get clearance before you can come in. So this is just an example. So in the case of Singapore, we actually rolled out the PortNet in 1989 as well, together with the TradeNet itself. And this allowed the operator or the players, the actors in the port, they are able to digitally exchange information when they should truck in to collect the container, and once they are inside the port facility, where do they go, which yard do they actually approach, etc. They're also able to get updated information about when the ship is arriving, when is it docking, and etc. Next slide. So moving, I think with earlier I showed the whole evolution. I think now we are moving beyond just the B2G. We are extending this whole single window capability from a G2B or B2G to a G2G or B2B itself, where we want to make sure that the data can be flowed. If you think about it, the information, any approval coming up from the single window for example, export process, that data is very critical as well if on the import side of things, because we actually can track the milestones and the progression. So this information can be very useful for the B2B themselves as well. At the same time, with this whole digitalization that's happening, government across the world, for example, in Southeast ASEAN itself, there's a lot of collaboration where we can actually design, for example, some kind of free trade arrangement for goods that is sold within the ASEAN region itself. And then there's a lot of exchange of information. So next slide. Let me give you an example of what a G2G look like. In the case of Singapore, they came up with this concept of what they call international connectivity services, where the single window still process all the import-export through Singapore. But in view of the free trade agreement that they have established with Australia, China, and with ASEAN itself, we wanted to exchange information. Today, at this moment, all this data exchange is purely for Singapore Customs or the government agency to do better risk management, so that they can reconcile the information that they receive from their counterpart against the data that is submitted by the trader. And so this is an example of a G2G implementation that has been done between Singapore and our trading partners. All right, lastly, so I think this whole interoperability is still at the early stage. I think one of the main consideration is that, there are multiple actors involved in the whole trade process itself. And some of these actors are still very paper heavy, and they are still operating using paper document, and sometimes even if they have an electronic document, let's say a PDF, but if the PDF is an image, that is to us from a digital point of view is still considered unstructured data. We have also faced other challenges like trying to that it requires a lot of investment to interconnect system, and if you engage all the different actors in the whole supply chain, you realize that the adoption of data standard is still differ. For example, the logistic player in the air space, at the way that the data standard they follow is very different from people in the ocean side of things. And I think there is still limited impact of the emerging technology. And at one point in time, everyone thought that blockchain is going to be the game changer in terms of trusting digital data itself. But today we are still, I mean, from a concept point of view, yes, technology, the blockchain technology actually does have purpose, but from an adoption point of view, we are seeing that it is not able to gain ground. So I think this is where moving forward with new technology like AI, we hope that it can really help to address some of these challenges. I think that the whole connectivity will still have to go on to make it happen, despite the high costs involved. And lastly, we think that from a government point of view, potentially government actually can, act as a trust actor itself, where they can issue certain credentials to give recognition to some of these digital data exchanges. And at the same time, I think we still have to be mindful in terms of our design of the system, that it should be cybersecurity proof, etc. And with that, I think I ends my presentation, and back to you, Eddie. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And I think it's interesting, right? When we talk about the trade single window, the implementation, one of the things that jump out from your presentation, the word is simplification, right? So simplification is not just about the exchange of data, but also the process. So, this will be a very good opportunity for all the different actors within the supply chain, whether they are traders, whether they are logistic providers, the government, even themselves. They need to be able to review their current paper-based system, what needs to have and what needs to be taken away, right? So we first talk about simplification of that. So it's not just about putting everything into digit, right? At the end of the day, we always talk about lean before automation, right? You clean up the processes first, see what is required, what's not, and then you go into automation, things like digitization and digitalization of the supply chain. Now, the other thing, it's also about the complexity. With different countries, you almost always have, the language issue, right? So even though English is primarily still used, but I believe, that in Canada, you will have different language requirements. Likewise, in Asia, in Thailand, Vietnam, they have their own systems in their local language. So that's also another challenge that you need to look at. Now, the other thing about, this journey of trade single window that I managed to glean from you is about the different countries are at different levels of maturity in terms of IT infrastructure. So it's not something that it's even though in today's world you can say yes, everybody has a computer, but the infrastructure to support that is also different. So I think that is something that we need to take care of. But I think there's hope. The hope is that we take the first step. The first step is, of course, to look at the journey and then plan for the eventuality of digitization and digitalization of the supply chain. So coming now, we've got some questions, and I've got some questions for both presenters. Perhaps I can start with Hugh. Hugh, if you look at the recent visit of Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to Asia Pacific, he visited China, India, Australia, Japan, basically to expand the trade ties with Asia Pacific. So if you look at that, for logistic practitioners on the ground, does this diversification to other trade partners and the regulatory complexity, what does that mean for businesses out there, right? What would your recommendations be?
Well, when I showed the initial slide of Canada's trade patterns, it's obvious that the vast majority right now is with the U.S., and that includes a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises as well. In fact, over the years, the Canadian government encouraged exporting to the U.S. as sort of a way of putting your toe in the water and getting used to it. And as you have rightly pointed out, Eddie, now that that focus is changing. The Prime Minister has been beating the bushes to make people aware that Canada wants to diversify. We've signed some agreements. We've come to other agreements to sort of work on these issues. And I always remind people that it's important. Of course, government can lead and government can lay the table, but at the end of the day, it's business that drives what's going to happen, and it's going to sit at that table and make things happen. So governments don't do business; business does business. But government can clearly have a role. And I think as Canadian businesses, large and small, will be starting to look for new export opportunities, inevitably, they're going to run into this issue of unfamiliarity, and perhaps they'll be lucky enough to do business with Singapore, and where the trade single window works very, very well, and we'll take some of that experience back. But from working in a very familiar environment for many people, just across the border, same language, more or less, common logistical ties and so on, to exporting to Japan or Southeast Asia or India, of course, is a big leap. And I think that's why it's important for governments to put in place as much infrastructure as they can. In terms of Canada, of course, has signed the Trade Facilitation Agreement and is part of this WTO initiative that I mentioned. But it's the scale that Eddie showed. It's only partway along. It's got it has an import single window. It's not at the stage yet where it's really ready to integrate that with other single windows. The Trade Facilitation Committee that is called for has not yet been established. I think that's why it's important for Canadian business, as they start engaging in more export, to make their voices heard at home, to say it can be done in a better way. We're going to be left behind if we don't keep up. So I think the trade diversification push goes hand in hand with a desire to smooth out the road bumps and to increase the facilitation that can be provided by the kind of work that's been done in Singapore.
Well, thanks, Hugh. I think you're absolutely right. If you look at the whole context, someone's export is somebody else's import, right? And to be able to share that data certainly will go a long way in helping speed, clearance and improve trade facilitation. So this next question I'm posing to Mike, right? Knowing what we know today about the trade single window and data exchange, today's shipment is about synchronizing data as much as, moving boxes, right? So it's no more about, nowadays we don't even think about moving boxes from point A to point B. It's about moving information. So if there is a lack of, the trade single window or exchange of data, how much of that actually impacts the predictability window in a supply chain, Mike?
Yeah. I think digital interoperability does not only buy us speed, but it buys certainty. Then for firms expanding into Europe or South America, or I think AI thinks that you can actually expect a lot of improvement in terms of the lead time, reduction in terms of occurrence variance, and expect earlier go or no go before the physical goods arrive. I think this is why matured region like ASEAN or EU focus first on the G2G data exchange rather than the trader-facing portals. I think once authority trusts the data, the rest become economically meaningful. On the data side of things, I think it'll be interesting to better trust specific data point that has been validated and processed by a national single window. I mean, if you look at purely data exchange between, let's say, a shipper and the forwarder or even a custom broker, they would like to always go back to the source of the data. But even if that data is provided, people still question its legitimacy. But imagine if this data can be proven and that the source also has been endorsed in a way because it has been processed in the single window, that might give enhanced trustworthiness of the data itself. I think to really facilitate this whole digital interoperability, I think one possible suggestion is to enroll data platform provider as an authorized economic operator under safe framework, and can extend the mutual recognition through bilateral or multilateral agreement. In the past, only the physical, the manufacturers themselves are enrolled into AEO program, and also the logistic player. But I think with the whole digitalization going on, we think that digital service provider who handle such data like the single window or this value-added service provider should be enrolled within the authorized economic operator. I think with this, we think that it does help to close up the gap, and hopefully it can process a lot of this shipment with more transparency and with higher speed itself.
Well, thanks, Mike. I think that's very clear, right? At the end of the day, it's not something that is a wish list, right? It's a must. It's a must do for global trade. And with that, I'd like to close this. But before I, put in the closing statement, I just want to let everyone know that the presentation will be made available to all members of CILT. At our respective websites for both CILT North America, Canada, as well as CILT Singapore. So we're running a little ahead. So let me just finish by making this comment, right? It's a wrap up. It's worth highlighting that we've discussed not just something that's theoretical, right? It's unfolding in real time. With Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's completed landmark visit to China, his first in nearly a decade, actually, aimed at revitalizing Canada-China economic relations, right? The visit resulted in a preliminary agreement to reduce tariffs on Canadian agricultural exports like canola, and has already led to new Chinese purchase contracts, a direct commercial outcome following the talks. Prime Minister Carney traveled to then India, Australia, and Japan in his latest effort to cultivate ties as he seeks to wean Canada off its economic dependency on the United States. This signals something important. Canada is actively seeking to diversify its trade portfolio beyond its traditional focus on the United States. That shift isn't just about diplomacy, right? It is a real implication for how goods move, how compliance is managed, and how supply chains are structured. And this brings us back to why trade single window system matters. In today's multi-directional trading environment, whether you're exporting canola to Asia, machinery to Europe, or manufactured goods to South America, companies are dealing with multiple agencies, multiple regulatory regimes, and a growing volume of data requirements. A trade single window helps cut through that complexity by enabling traders to submit data once and share it securely with all relevant government agencies, thereby improving visibility, reducing redundancies, and accelerating clearance. What we see internationally, growing trade relationships with Asia, renewed talks with Europe, and expanding South American links, all depend on reliable, interoperable frameworks for information exchange. For industry, that means increased efficiency, stronger competitiveness, and greater predictability in the global supply chain. So, as you return to your teams and operations, remember that the investments we make today in digital trade infrastructure are not just about operational improvement, they are about unlocking new markets and supporting Canada's competitiveness in the global economy. Right. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And I look forward to where these conversations will lead us next. So thank you and have a good evening, good day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.